Let's talk about one of the strangest alliances of World War II. It's the story of a group of radical German Jewish intellectuals who, after fleeing the absolute horrors of Nazism, were then hired by the US government. Their mission? To fight a secret intellectual war against the very regime that wanted every single one of them dead.
Right? It's a question that honestly sounds like the setup to a really weird joke. But the answer reveals this incredible intersection of philosophy, psychology, and believe it or not, full-on espionage.
Exactly. At the very height of the war, these exiles, who were, by the way, deeply critical of American capitalism, were recruited by US intelligence. So why? Well, it's simple. They understood the mind of the enemy better than anyone else on the planet. So let's unpack this truly unbelievable alliance. And we're talking about some heavy hitters from the Frankfurt School here, people like Marcuse and Neumann. They were brought right into the heart of the American war machine. I mean, having just escaped Germany, their firsthand knowledge of its culture, its politics, its psychology, that made them an absolutely priceless asset in the fight against fascism. To really get what they brought to the table, we first have to understand their core ideas about power and the psychology that holds it all together. This was the question for them, the one they obsessed over. For the Frankfurt School, this wasn't just about economics or bad politics. No, they were convinced the real answer was buried deep inside the human psyche. So check this out. The thinker Erich Fromm made this really crucial distinction. He said modern society gave us freedom from, freedom from the old authorities like the church or the monarchy. But that left us with a terrifying new problem, freedom too, the scary responsibility of having to figure out our own meaning and purpose in life. And for a lot of people, especially the economically crushed German middle class back then, this responsibility was just too much. It created this gnawing sense of anxiety, of powerlessness, of being totally alone in the world. And this quote from Fromm just nails it. To escape that unbearable burden of freedom, people start looking desperately for a new authority to submit to. A strong leader who'll just tell them what to do, what to think, and what to believe. Fromm actually had a name for this, the sadomasochistic character. This is the personality type that doesn't want to change their situation. They want to hand their fate over to someone else. They bow down to those they see as strong, and in turn, they get to dominate those they see as weak. This, he argued, was the psychological engine that powered fascism. But look, the Frankfurt School was not a monolith. They weren't all on the same page. They had these intense internal debates about the very nature of the beast they were all fighting. Just take their economic analysis. On one side, you had Friedrich Pollock, who argued Nazism was a brand new thing, a state capitalism that had actually made the system immune to crisis. But Franz Neumann completely disagreed. He said no, it was a totalitarian monopoly capitalism that was even more dangerous and more likely to collapse. And this debate was vital for trying to predict how stable the Nazi regime actually was. And it wasn't just about psychology and economics. Another thinker, Walter Benjamin, pointed to something else entirely, fascism's cultural power. He coined this incredible phrase, the aestheticization of politics, to describe how the Nazis used myths, symbols, and these massive rallies to turn politics into a kind of twisted theater, a spectacle that made war itself seem like a beautiful, dark form of art. Okay, so you might be wondering, how were all these abstract, high-level theories actually put to use in the war? Well, that's where their day jobs for the US government come in. So once they were in Washington, they got scooped up by the OSS, the organization that would later become the CIA. They weren't just writing philosophical essays anymore. Suddenly, they were analyzing enemy propaganda, advising on real military strategy, and even helping to draw up the lists of Nazi war criminals who would eventually face trial at Nuremberg. And their insights led to some really startling conclusions. Get this. Franz Neumann argued passionately that the Allied strategy of bombing German cities was a huge mistake. He predicted it wouldn't break the German will to fight at all. Instead, it would just make people focus on pure survival, making any kind of organized resistance to Hitler impossible. And in the end, it would probably just make the war drag on even longer. And guess what? Decades later, history proved him right. But maybe their most critical work was trying to understand the thing that seemed impossible to understand, the systematic, industrial-scale hatred at the very core of Nazi ideology. I mean, how could anyone even begin to explain the Holocaust? For these thinkers who had literally just escaped it,
This wasn't some abstract academic question.
In their work, Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer came up with a really powerful theory. They argued that all the frustration, all the anger, and all the deep injustices of the whole economic system were basically funneled, channeled, and offloaded onto one single group. The masses were told to shout, "Stop thief," but to point their fingers at the Jews.
And this is where their argument gets really deep. They said it was a kind of false projection. They proposed that Jewish people were hated because their image represented everything the oppressed masses secretly wanted but could never have: a life of happiness that wasn't based on brutal power, a home without borders, a sense of meaning without all the empty myths. The rulers took these secret desires and twisted them into things to be hated, all to keep control.
And this all brings us to the final, and maybe the most chilling, takeaway from the Frankfurt School's entire project.
You know, Erich Fromm started his book Escape from Freedom with this very quote from the American philosopher John Dewey, and the point is absolutely crucial. The fight against fascism isn't just about defeating some foreign enemy. The real battlefield, it's internal. It's within ourselves, within our societies, and within our own psychological weak spots that are vulnerable to authoritarianism.
And that leaves us with a pretty critical question for our own time, doesn't it? Their work forces us to ask if those same anxieties that drove people into the arms of fascism 80 years ago are still around today. In a world filled with so much uncertainty, are we too still tempted to escape from the burden of our own freedom?